The girl who never walked. The sun had barely risen over Venice Beach, but the soft golden light was already touching the quiet waves. Most of the city was still asleep, but not him. Keanu Reeves walked alone, his steps slow and thoughtful, the cold morning air curling around his jacket like a whisper. The world saw him as a Hollywood legend, an action hero, a symbol of strength. But here, at this hour, he was just a man trying to escape the noise of fame. His breath fogged in the crisp air as he sipped lukewarm coffee from a small paper cup, the scent of salt and sea mixing with roasted beans. He didn't expect to see anyone at this hour, but something made him stop. Just ahead on the edge of the sand was a small figure sitting on a wooden bench. She looked no older than 10, bundled in an oversized hoodie, her legs dangling awkwardly off the bench, not quite touching the ground, but they didn't swing. They didn't move at all. Because they weren't real. Her legs were made of dull metal, uneven and crudely fitted. They looked heavy, painful, homemade almost. Keanu's heart slowed as he watched her struggle to adjust one of them. She wasn't crying, but the tightness in her face told its own story. Frustration, embarrassment, maybe even shame. He hesitated, then he walked over. "Hey," he said softly, keeping a respectful distance. "I come here every morning, but I've never seen someone as early as me." She glanced up. Her face was striking, not because of beauty or perfection, but because of the fierce strength in her eyes. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I needed to feel something." He noticed the wrench clutched in her small hand. Her fingers were red from cold and strain. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mia. I'm Keanu." She blinked. "Like, the actor?" He nodded with a small smile. "Some people think so." A beat passed. "My dad used to say your movies made him feel like anything was possible," Mia said, then looked away. "But he's not around anymore." Keanu didn't press. He knew that kind of pain too well. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bench beside her. Not too close. Just close enough to be there. "You built those yourself?" he asked gently, nodding at her prosthetics. "My uncle helped. He's a mechanic, but we couldn't afford the good ones, the kind that actually work." Her words cut deeper than she knew. Not because of pity, but because of how plainly she said them. Like she'd accepted this version of life. Like hope was just another broken part. "Do they hurt?" he asked. She nodded. "Every time I try to stand, it feels like my bones are screaming." Keanu looked out at the waves, then back at her. "Can I show you something?" he asked. She looked at him unsure, then gave a cautious nod. He stood, stepped a few feet away, and knelt in the sand. Then, using a stick, he began drawing something. A motorcycle. But not just any motorcycle. A custom-built one with shock-absorbing arms, titanium reinforcements, and precision-engineered joints. Maya watched, confused. "I've been working with bikes for years," he said, "but not just for riding. I build machines that respond to the person, like extensions of who they are. Not just transport, freedom." She frowned. "But I'm not a bike." He smiled softly. "Maybe not. But maybe the way I think about machines could help you." For a long moment she said nothing, then, "What do you mean?" Keanu wiped his hands and sat back on the bench. "If you'll let me, I want to help. I don't want to just give you something, I want us to build something together. Something that fits you, not the other way around." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" He didn't hesitate. "Because someone once believed in me when I felt broken, and because I think the world needs to see what happens when a girl like you walks on her own terms." Mia stared at him. For the first time that morning, her lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile, but just as quickly her expression darkened again. "They told me I'd never walk right," she said. "That even if I got the best legs in the world, I'd still fall." Keanu leaned in slightly, his voice low and steady. "Falling doesn't mean failure. It means you're still moving. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, of hesitation, of the kind of moment that lives at the edge of change. Then she whispered, "Okay." That one word lit a fire in Keanu's chest. He stood slowly and extended his hand. "Then let's get to work." She took it, and in that moment, something shifted. Not just in her world, but in his. Days passed like pages turning. Keanu brought her into his private garage in East Los Angeles, a place where machines came to life. He introduced her to the small, tight-knit team that helped design custom motorcycles. But now, for the first time, their tools were aimed at something more delicate, more human. They scanned her posture, her weight distribution, the angle of her steps. They took measurements in silence, letting her dignity stay untouched. Keanu watched everything, never barking orders, never rushing, just present, steady, calm. But not everyone was on board. One night after the team had left, Keanu sat in the garage, alone, staring at a blueprint. A voice cut through the silence. "You sure about this, man?" It was Carlos, his longtime mechanic and friend. "This isn't like building a bike," Carlos continued. "This is a kid's life. If we get it wrong..." Keanu looked up, his eyes intense. "That's why we're not going to get it wrong." Carlos held his gaze, then slowly nodded. "She's lucky to have you." Keanu shook his head. "I'm the lucky one." But just as things began to move forward, shadows started to gather. People began to ask questions. Why was a movie star spending so much time with one girl? Why was he suddenly missing interviews, delaying projects, stepping out of the spotlight? The tabloids circled like sharks. Headlines screamed speculation. Keanu's secret life in a warehouse, Mystery Girl, and the actor's obsession. He tried to ignore them. So did Maya. But rumors have a way of seeping into even the strongest walls. One day, while testing a new prototype, Mia's expression was off. Distracted. Distant. "You okay?" Keanu asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, "Why are they saying all those things about you? About me?" He crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. "Because people fear what they don't understand. But we're not here for them. We're here for something bigger." Her lips trembled. "What if we fail?" He reached out, gently tapped the center of her chest. "Then we fail forward." And just like that, the fire in her eyes sparked again. But the storm wasn't over. In the coming days, something would happen that neither of them saw coming. Something that would shake the world they were building, and put everything they'd worked for on the line. Storm at the gates. A week after their quiet breakthrough, the energy in the garage had shifted. The once silent and humble workshop had begun to pulse with determination. Sparks flew from metal as welders worked late into the night, the air thick with the smell of steel and engine oil. In the center of it all stood Keanu, sleeves rolled up, grease smudged across his forearm, his eyes fixed on a delicate structure rising from the work table, a new pair of legs for Mia. They weren't ordinary prosthetics. They were a fusion of biomechanics and engineering, designed not only for movement but for expression. Each joint was shaped to reflect the natural rhythm of a child's walk, and each component was light, strong, and quiet. The legs had been molded not from cold calculations but from weeks of watching how Mia sat, how she leaned, how her shoulders tensed when she tried to shift weight. These weren't generic tools. They were built for her, made with something that even advanced labs sometimes forgot: heart. As the sun dropped below the skyline one Thursday evening, Keanu motioned for Mia to step forward. Her old prosthetics clunked heavily on the concrete floor. She was wearing a pair of soft training shoes he'd gotten for her, shoes that had never known what it felt like to run. A hush fell over the garage. His team gathered in the background. Even Carlos, usually gruff and unimpressed, stood silently with his arms crossed, watching. Keanu crouched down, unfastened the straps on Mia's old legs, and helped her slide into the new ones. The sockets clicked gently, each one built with a memory fit system so the limbs would respond almost instinctively to her weight shifts. He secured the final clasp, then stepped back and nodded. "They're yours now," he said softly. "Try." She looked terrified, but she didn't back away. Her small hands gripped the edge of the workbench as she slowly lifted herself. The new legs trembled slightly under her, adjusting to the pressure, sinking with her motion. Then something unbelievable happened. She stood, straight, stable. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked down at the legs beneath her. They looked natural, not like a machine or a tool. They looked like they belonged to her. For the first time, she wasn't being held up by borrowed strength. She was standing on her own. A slow, shocked silence spread across the room. Then, without thinking, she took a step. Then another. Her posture was uncertain but alive. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she walked, in a straight line to the far side of the garage. Carlos muttered, "Holy hell." Someone else whispered, "She's doing it." Keanu said nothing. He just watched, his heart swelling with something too big to name. When Mia finally turned around, her face wet with tears, she looked right at him. "I'm walking." "Yes," he said, voice thick. "You are." They thought that moment would be the most powerful part of the journey. They were wrong, because what started as a private miracle between an actor and a girl was about to spill into the world in a way neither of them had planned. The next morning, Keanu brought Mia to an empty park at sunrise. The grass was still damp, the city still quiet. They wanted privacy. They wanted to see if she could walk on uneven ground. Carlos came too, filming the session with a stabilizer cam to review her movements later for further tuning. It was meant to be a quiet test, but destiny had other plans. Somewhere nearby, a jogger passed by, slowing as he noticed the familiar face of Keanu Reeves. He kept his distance but couldn't help but stare at the girl walking in robotic legs across the wet grass with determination in every step. He didn't speak to them, didn't interrupt. But he recorded, later that day, he posted a short clip, online. No music, no fancy edit. Just a child walking with Keanu, watching from a distance, saying only 3 words into the wind. "You did it." And by nightfall, the world had seen it. Within 24 hours, the video exploded across social media platforms. It wasn't labeled or tagged with anything fancy. It didn't need it. People didn't care who filmed it. They cared about what it showed. A girl walking with dignity in the presence of someone who believed in her when others didn't. The comment sections were flooded. People from every country, from veterans with amputations to parents of disabled children, began sharing their own stories. Tears, hope, memories, pain. It all came pouring out. News outlets picked it up by morning. Keanu Reeves builds legs for disabled girl. Her first steps inspire millions. But fame, as Keanu had long known, was a double-edged sword. The media wanted interviews. They wanted details. Sponsors came knocking, offering to commercialize the legs, asking for licensing rights, partnerships, TV shows, even reality series. They saw a miracle and wanted to turn it into a brand. Keanu refused them all. "This isn't a product," he told one executive on the phone, his voice firm. "It's a promise." The man chuckled nervously. "You're sitting on $1 billion idea." "Then let it stay seated," Keanu replied and hung up. But the pressure only grew. Journalists began surrounding the garage. Paparazzi waited outside. Even Mia's school, which had never paid her much attention before, now sent officials to discuss opportunities. They called her a symbol, a beacon, a marketing dream. Mia, who had just learned how to walk, now had to learn how to protect herself from people who wanted to own her story. One afternoon, after a swarm of photographers followed her and Keanu through the parking lot, she broke down in the back of the garage. She threw a wrench across the room and collapsed onto the floor, crying into her arms. "I didn't ask for this," she sobbed. "I just wanted to walk." Keanu sat beside her. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then gently, he spoke. "Mia, listen to me. This story, your story, doesn't belong to them. They can write articles, take pictures, chase headlines. But they weren't there when you stood for the first time. They don't know what it took. They don't feel what you feel. This journey is yours, and you get to decide how the world hears it. She looked up at him, face red and tear-streaked. But, I'm scared. He nodded. So am I. But we don't move forward because we're fearless. We move because it's right. A week later, they held a small private press gathering, not for fame, but to take back control of the narrative. Mia, wearing the same legs she had walked with in the park, stood beside Keanu and told her story. Simple, raw, honest. She didn't ask for pity, she asked for progress. She talked about how it felt to grow up watching other kids run while she sat in silence, how her legs weren't the only thing people stared at, how the world saw her as incomplete, broken, less. And then she told them what it felt like the day someone finally didn't see her as a project, but as a partner. The room fell silent. Then a reporter asked, "So what now?" Mia looked to Keanu, then back at the cameras. Now we build more legs. For other kids. For anyone who needs them. And just like that, a movement began. But behind the applause and admiration, something darker stirred. A powerful medical tech company had taken notice of the story. A company that manufactured high-end prosthetics and charged desperate families more than the cost of a home just for basic mobility. Keanu and Mia's breakthrough was a threat. Not just to their business, but to their monopoly. They sent warnings, then offers, then threats disguised as legal documents. Keanu refused to back down. "They want to bury this," Carlos warned one night as they looked through stacks of cease and desist letters. "They'll come after everything." Keanu's jaw clenched. Then let them come. He didn't know yet what that defiance would cost him, because while they were changing lives, someone, somewhere, was preparing to shut them down for good. The warning no one heard. It was a Thursday night when the silence in Keanu's workshop was broken, not by tools or voices, but by the sharp sound of something crashing outside. The team had gone home hours earlier. Only Keanu remained sitting at the corner table, revising a new set of blueprints designed to adjust the balance sensors in Maya's custom legs. Outside, the streets of East Los Angeles had quieted, and only the occasional echo of passing cars broke the rhythm of Keanu's thoughts. Then came the sound again, this time louder. It wasn't distant anymore. It was here. Glass shattered near the side door. Keanu stood up slowly, his instincts sharpened by years of real-life discipline and on-screen combat training. The security lights flickered. Shadows moved beyond the garage walls. He didn't panic. He moved quietly, step by step, toward the side entrance, grabbing a heavy metal wrench from the table as he passed it. When he opened the door, he expected to find vandals or maybe some overzealous fans who had pushed too far. But what he found instead was far more calculated. The garage's control panel had been tampered with. A small black box with blinking red lights had been clipped onto the power conduit. It looked like a surge trigger, designed to fry the system. The security feed was already dead. And painted, in red across the metal wall of the garage, were 3 words: "Stop or burn." He stared at the words for a long time, unmoving as the night air crept around him. Whoever had done this hadn't come to steal. They hadn't come to vandalize for fun. They'd come to threaten, and they'd done it with precision. This wasn't the work of random criminals. This was a message from someone with money, reach, and purpose. The next morning, Keanu didn't tell Mia everything. She arrived early, her steps steadier than ever, a bright yellow scarf around her neck and excitement in her voice. She wanted to show him a small sketchbook she'd started. In it were designs, prototypes for other kids, colorful legs with lights, adjustable joints, even foldable travel options. She called the pages freedom maps. Her face glowed with ideas, unaware of what had happened only hours before. Keanu forced a smile, nodding as she explained her sketches, but his eyes kept drifting to the new locks he had installed, the added security cameras, the bolt latch on the inside gate. She noticed eventually. "Why is everything different?" she asked. He paused, then answered gently, "Because some people are afraid of change." Her smile faded. "You mean they're afraid of me?" "No," he said. "They're afraid of what happens when the right person finally stands." The week that followed was tense. More strange events occurred. Power outages that seemed too specific. Boxes of parts mysteriously disappearing from delivery trucks. One of their design computers wiped clean overnight. At first, the team suspected bad luck. Keanu knew better. He hired private security, brought in backup servers, and still, he refused to stop. Every delay only sharpened his focus. Every setback added to the fire that kept him going. The girl had walked, and she would walk further. But just as the workshop pushed forward, the enemy grew bolder. An envelope arrived one morning, hand-delivered, with no return address. Inside was a letter from a powerful prosthetics conglomerate. It was cold, legal, and venomous. They accused Keanu of unauthorized medical development, of endangering a minor, of building devices that had not been cleared by regulatory authorities. They threatened legal action that could strip him of his assets, revoke his business licenses, and worst of all, take Mia away from his care under child endangerment laws. The letter was a mask for a bigger threat. Stop helping the girl or lose everything. Keanu showed the letter to Carlos first. "They can't really do this, can they?" Carlos asked, his face pale. "Can they take her away?" Keanu's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of steel. "Only if we let them." He knew they had stepped into something deeper than innovation. They had crossed into a battlefield where money disguised itself as law, where greed wore a suit and sat behind a polished desk. But they weren't alone anymore. Since the video had gone viral, emails had flooded in, messages from all over the world. Mothers, fathers, children, veterans, dancers, athletes, people who had lived in silence, suddenly speaking up. One message stood out. It came from a woman in rural India. She had lost both her legs in a bus accident and had spent 7 years crawling from place to place, unable to afford even the simplest aid. She had watched Mia's video on a borrowed phone. She ended the email with 5 words that tore straight through Keanu's heart. "Maybe I can walk too." He printed that email and pinned it above his workbench. Every time the fear crept in, he read it and kept going. But the threat wasn't over. A week later, during a live-stream demonstration of the new leg prototype for children under 5, their workshop was hit again, this time more violently. A fire was started in the alley behind the building. It was quickly put out, but the message was clear. They weren't just trying to scare him anymore. They were trying to erase the project completely. After the fire, Keanu gathered the team in the center of the garage. Mia stood beside him, eyes wide but unshaken. "I won't force anyone to stay," he said. "They're coming after us hard. This is more than we signed up for." No one moved. Carlos stepped forward. "I didn't sign up for fame or lawsuits. I signed up because a girl walked for the first time in her life, and I'm not leaving until every kid like her gets the same chance." One by one, the others nodded. Mia looked up at Keanu and said, "They can't burn a movement." He knelt beside her. "No, but they'll try." They started rebuilding that night. Every blueprint backed up, every component scanned, protected, reinforced. And then Keanu did something unexpected. He made a call to an old friend, someone deep in the world of medical innovation and international aid, someone who owed him a favor. And within 72 hours, the workshop had been duplicated. A second lab was built quietly in a remote location, the files copied and stored in a private server farm outside of regulatory reach. The mission had become too big for one city. And then they launched something bold, a free open-source design platform, WalkFree, where the blueprints for custom legs were made available to anyone in the world. No gatekeeping, no fees, just code, guides, and hope. Mechanics in Kenya began printing low-cost models. Engineers in Brazil modified the designs for jungle terrain. A retired teacher in Sweden began a fundraiser to build a rural leg lab. And from every corner of the planet, stories began to rise of people walking, running, dancing for the first time in years. But the more impact they made, the more desperate their enemies became. One morning just before dawn, Keanu received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low and mechanical, clearly masked. "You think this is a game?" the voice said. "You've humiliated us. Walk away, or she suffers." Then the line went dead. Keanu stood frozen, not because he feared for himself, but because for the first time, someone had made it personal. The next move wouldn't be legal. It wouldn't be corporate. It would be dangerous. And as Keanu looked across the workshop and saw Mia laughing with one of the engineers, completely unaware of what had just been said, he knew the war had just begun. Under the skin of silence, the city of angels never truly sleeps. But there are hours, dark and breathless, when even the loudest hearts hesitate. It was during one of those hours that Keanu Reeves sat alone in his garage office, the soft hum of backup servers filling the silence like distant thunder. Outside the reinforced glass, the moon hung low, its silver light casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The warning call from the masked voice had not left his mind. It echoed through every moment since, not as a threat, but as a clock ticking toward something unnamed. He had seen this kind of escalation before, not in scripts or sound stages, but in real-world conflicts in the quiet corners of suffering people tried to ignore. This wasn't just about prosthetic legs anymore. It wasn't just about helping a child. They had pulled back a curtain and revealed a system built on profit, pain, and silence. And someone in that system had decided enough was enough. Keanu knew he had to protect Mia. More than the lab. More than the cause. She had become more than a symbol. She was the soul of the movement. And now, she was in danger. Early the next morning, without waking anyone, Keanu took Mia on a drive up the coast. The roads were still empty, the ocean whispering softly alongside them. They didn't speak at first. She just leaned her head against the window, the morning sun catching the light on her artificial knees. They arrived at a small, private ranch, nestled between two hills, surrounded by redwoods and silence. A friend of Keanu's owned it, a former stuntman who had turned to horses and healing after losing a leg in an on-set accident. It was a sanctuary, both for animals and for people who needed to breathe without watching their backs. Mia stepped out of the car and turned to him. "Is this a hiding place?" He looked down at her, honesty flickering in his eyes. "It's a pause. Just for a few days, I need to figure things out. I need to know you're safe." She looked around. "It's peaceful. Sometimes peace is the loudest thing when you've been living in fear." For 3 days, Mia trained with the horses. She fed them, brushed their coats, even helped mend a small fence that had been knocked down in the wind. The ranch owner, Jack, showed her how to balance her weight more effectively on uneven terrain. They designed simple obstacle courses using hay bales and ropes to help her gain more control over her balance and reaction. Each evening she sat under the stars, with Keanu, asking questions that most children didn't have the courage to ask. "Why do they hate us?" she asked one night, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "Because we remind them what they should have done a long time ago," Keanu replied. "But I'm just a kid." He turned to her. "And maybe that's why it scares them so much. You didn't wait for permission, you just walked." While they hid in the hills back in Los Angeles, the storm was growing. News outlets started reporting that the walk-free platform was being investigated by global authorities for unauthorized medical distribution. Keanu's name was dragged into the headlines again, this time accompanied by words like reckless, radical, and unlicensed. Sponsors he had worked with for decades began quietly pulling out of deals. Charities that once praised his philanthropy suddenly distanced themselves. But none of it broke him. What broke him was what happened next. On the 4th day of their retreat, a package arrived at the garage. It had no sender name, just a small box wrapped in matte black paper. Inside was a prosthetic joint, one of Keanu's prototypes, but twisted, melted, and shattered, as if it had been tortured. And attached to it was a single photograph. Mia, taken from a distance, smiling at the ranch, unaware she was being watched. Keanu received the message via secure text, sent by Carlos with no caption. He didn't wait. He packed up that same hour, brought Mia back to the city with the kind of speed that made the trees blur and the air disappear. She didn't ask questions this time. She just held his arm the whole way, as if something inside her had finally understood the seriousness of what they were facing. When they returned, the garage had been swept clean by Carlos and the others. The photo had been erased. Security, increased, and tracking software was now running on every server. They were no longer just creators. They had become targets, and every step forward now came with a shadow. Keanu gathered his core team. Engineers, developers, legal advisors. Every one of them had remained despite the growing danger. They weren't bound by contracts or salaries anymore. They were bound by something stronger. Conviction. "They're watching," Keanu said, his voice low and steady. "They know where we are, and they're waiting for us to slip." "Then we don't slip," said Carlos. "We rise." So they did. Quietly, strategically. They began developing a new type of prosthetic, one that didn't rely on expensive materials or advanced tech, something modular, printable, distributable without a lab. They called it Project Ember, because even if the fire was crushed, the ember could spread and ignite again elsewhere. But they needed more than design. They needed a messenger, Mia. Against every instinct to protect her, Keanu asked her if she wanted to speak publicly again, not just to the media, but at the World Health Summit in Geneva. It was risky. It would expose her. It would put a child in front of the very people who wanted her story buried. And she said yes. "If they want to silence me," she said, "then let the whole world hear me first." Keanu arranged the trip, with the help of a few high-level allies still loyal to the cause. The flight was long, tense, every second thick with unspoken fear. Mia practiced her speech quietly on the plane, her eyes never leaving the window. Geneva welcomed them with cold, rain, and bright lights. Security was tight. Media swarmed the airport, but they were ushered through private channels. For 3 days they prepared, refined, rehearsed. And then, on the 4th day, Mia walked onto the stage. Alone. She stood behind the podium. Not as a victim, not as a child in need of sympathy, but as a force. "When I was born," she began, "they said I would never walk. When I tried, they said it would always hurt. When I did, they said it was impossible. And now that I can, they want to take it away." The room fell silent. "But you can't take away what's already inside someone," she continued. "You can't erase the courage it takes to try. You can't unbuild what we built together." Applause didn't come right away. Instead, there was a pause. A sacred pause. Then the world stood up. Every delegate. Every ambassador. Even the critics. They stood and clapped. But while the hall celebrated, while cameras flashed and hope soared, a man stood in the shadows of the back row. Tall, silent, wearing an earpiece. He didn't clap. He didn't smile. He turned and left through a side door, speaking into his collar. And hours later, back in Los Angeles, Keanu's garage was raided by unknown agents posing as federal regulators. They took equipment, files, servers. When Keanu and Mia landed the next day, the place they had built their future in was gone. The spark they couldn't still, the scent of smoke still lingered in the ruins. Not the heavy, choking kind from fire, but the faint, bitter trace of something scorched in silence. Wires, plastics, traces of oil, purpose. KeanuReeves stood in the center of the now emptied garage, the place where dreams had once lived and where not long ago the world had changed, because a little girl had taken her first real step. The walls were stripped of everything, computers, machinery, blueprints, even the workbench he'd built with his own hands. All gone. What remained was only the echo of what had been and the knowledge of who had taken it. He didn't speak. Not at first. Carlos stood behind him, jaw clenched, fists trembling by his side. The rest of the team remained just outside, too shocked to come in, as if stepping over the threshold would make it all more real. Mia wasn't with them. Keanu had kept her away the moment they touched down from Geneva, sending her straight to a safe house with Jack and two of his most trusted people. She hadn't seen the destruction, but she would soon. Carlos finally broke the silence. No warrant, no identification, just a badge flash, some nonsense about national regulation, and they stormed through like it was war. Keanu's eyes didn't blink. Did they touch the off-site backup? No, they don't know where the vault is. We encrypted it behind 4 layers of secure access. And the files we sent to Walkfree's underground node, those are still intact. They only took what was physically here. Then they took nothing, Keanu said quietly. But Carlos shook his head, frustrated. Man, they took us. They erased months of work, set us back to day one, and we've got no proof they were even real. Keanu turned slowly to face him. They think if they remove the tools the fire dies, but they never understood what we're really building. Carlos stared. Then tell me what we're building. Because right now, all I see is a team in shock, a girl hiding in the hills, and you standing here like you don't feel any of this. Keanu stepped forward, his voice low but firm. We're building belief, Carlos. Not metal, not code, not plastic limbs. Belief. And they can steal every bolt from this building. But if that belief survives in even one person, we win. Carlos exhaled hard and looked away, ashamed of his outburst. Then he nodded. Okay, then we rebuild, from scratch. But before they could even begin laying down a plan, a knock came at the back door. 3 hard raps, spaced evenly, then silence. Keanu moved cautiously. He knew that pattern. It was a signal only shared with 2 people in his inner circle. When he opened the door, he wasn't surprised to see Jack standing there. But the expression on his face wasn't peace. It was panic. They know where Mia is, Jack said, his voice a whisper between gasps. They followed us. We had to move. I brought her here. Keanu's heart dropped. Where is she now? In the van. I didn't let her out. She's safe. But we've got to disappear, Keanu. Now. This isn't sabotage anymore. It's surveillance. They're trying to corner us. They moved fast. Within minutes, they cleared what few tools they had left into bags. Jack pulled the van around to the back alley, shielded by dumpsters and overgrown fences. Inside the vehicle, Mia sat in the middle row, clutching her sketchbook, her eyes wide but calm. They found us? She asked softly. Keanu nodded, opening the door. They did, but they won't find us again. I don't want to run forever. He met her eyes. Then we run for a reason. They drove without speaking much. Keanu led them through side streets, switching vehicles twice with the help of 2 other allies waiting along the route. They finally arrived at a secluded facility deep in the Mojave Desert, an old radio research bunker turned private lab, once used during Cold War signal experiments. It had been abandoned for years until Keanu quietly purchased and restored it with a backup plan in mind. Most people didn't even know the property existed, and now it would be the heart of the resurrection. They called it Station Ember. The walls were lined with lead insulation, blocking signals from reaching the outside. Inside, it was modest but strong, solar-powered, armored glass, satellite-independent communication systems. It was a phoenix nest in every way, safe, silent, and ready to rise. The first order of business wasn't tech, it was people. Keanu activated a deep channel network through Walkfree, sending encrypted messages to every one of the engineers, doctors, and dreamers they'd helped inspire. He didn't ask for money. He didn't promise success. He simply asked one question. Will you help us build again? Responses began trickling in within an hour, not all from the rich, not all from the known, but from mechanics in Thailand, coders in Nigeria, a nurse in Ukraine who'd modified an open-source limb to help her brother dance again after a bomb had taken his legs. Dozens became hundreds. Hundreds turned to thousands. And soon, Station Ember became a digital command post for a global uprising, not of violence but of compassion, resilience, and innovation. Inside the bunker, Keanu began rebuilding the original design, but better. Every weakness they'd seen in the first prototypes was analyzed. Mia sat beside him every day, her presence no longer that of a student, but a partner. Her sketches had matured, her ideas were precise. Sometimes she spoke without even looking up, suggesting structural changes to balance plates or torque distribution, and the engineers around her would blink in surprise. "She's not a child anymore," Carlos murmured to Keanu one night. "She's one of us." But as momentum grew, so did resistance. The corporation behind the threats, now confirmed through an anonymous leak to be a conglomerate called Cinerex Biosystems, began planting stories in the media. They labeled Keanu's project as dangerous, underground engineering. Articles accused him of exploiting children for publicity. Bots flooded the walk-free forums with disinformation, spreading fear and doubt. One article even accused Keanu of staging Mia's condition, claiming she had never been disabled to begin with. The world split in two. Supporters flooded social channels with Shachit Walk with Mia and Shak Build with Keanu, creating art, stories, even music, inspired by the movement. But the other side was ruthless. One night, while alone in the server room, Keanu received a live video feed via private channel. It showed the front gate of Station Ember. Standing just outside it was a man in a suit, holding a phone. He said nothing, just smiled and held up a sign to the camera. "You've got 1 week." The message was clear. 1 week before they made their next move. No law this time. No letters. Something final. Keanu stood there for a long moment, the cold hum of the servers buzzing behind him. Then he walked out to the workshop. He looked at his team, then at Maya and said, "We've got 6 days." "To do what?" someone asked. He looked at the new leg prototypes on the table. Smaller, faster, better. To give the world something they can never take back. When the world stood, the desert held its breath. 5 days had passed since the man with the sign appeared at the gates of Station Ember. 5 days of tension threaded through every breath, every motion, every line of code and weld of steel. Each member of the team worked as if the sun itself might not rise again if they failed. The countdown wasn't just about fear, it was about purpose. The kind of purpose that pushes people past the boundaries of comfort, sleep, safety, and into the territory of something greater. Keanu Reeves moved through the facility with the focus of a man who no longer feared being broken, because he had already been broken before and risen stronger. Every eye turned to him for guidance, and he never once raised his voice. He didn't need to. The gravity of what they were building was heavier than orders. Maya worked beside him, now fully integrated into the engineering team. Her ideas had matured, but more importantly, so had her courage. She had been watching the world from behind layers of reinforced firewalls, seeing the chaos unfold. Cinerex Biosystems had gone into overdrive, unleashing a storm of lies and staged reports. They produced fake testimonies from children claiming injury from Keanu's designs, fabricated videos of mechanical failures, even deepfakes to discredit the project. But in the face of that synthetic storm, the truth refused to die. Real people from every continent sent video messages, sometimes from hospital beds or dusty homes without electricity, parents in wheelchairs, children with missing limbs, veterans who had lost legs in war and never once felt whole again. Each one stood up, not physically, but in voice. They had never met Keanu. They had never touched the legs Mia wore. But they believed in what they represented, because what they saw in that little girl was not science fiction. It was freedom. On the 6th day, as the sun clawed its way across the desert, the final prototype was finished. It wasn't just a leg, it was a declaration. It was light enough for a 5-year-old to lift effortlessly, yet strong enough to carry a grown man through sand, stairs, or rubble. It had integrated sensory feedback, allowing the wearer to feel texture, slope, and pressure. It wasn't a replacement. It was a resurrection. They had named the design Nova, because from destruction came new light. They didn't wait for the 7th day to bring war to their doorstep. They brought their story to the world first. Keanu arranged an emergency global stream through underground networks and mirrored channels. Social platforms tried to block it, but within minutes the link had gone viral. Not because it was flashy or professionally produced, because it was real. The screen opened on Keanu sitting beside Mia inside Station Ember. No lights, no music, no script. Just the two of them, surrounded by the tools they had built with. Keanu began, "This isn't a company pitch. It's not a brand or a campaign. This is one man telling you the truth, that a child believed she could walk and she did. And then, the world tried to punish her for it." He paused, breathing steadily. "They told us we were a threat. That helping people without permission was dangerous. That making legs for the poor was a crime. But here's what I say to that. No one should need permission to hope. No one should need a license to stand." Then Mia spoke, her voice calm but unshakable. "I was born without legs. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was people looking at me like I was broken, like I would always be less than them. But this man didn't see that. He saw what I could become. And he didn't fix me. He helped me find what was already inside." She stood up wearing the Nova legs. No crutches, no braces. She turned and ran. Across the room, then back again. The video cut to a rapid sequence, clips submitted by others, across the globe who had built their own versions. A boy in Lebanon walking for the first time. A girl in Alaska racing across the snow. A father in Vietnam dancing with his daughter. None of them used the same design. None of them had perfect tools. But they all moved, and they all smiled. And then, abruptly, the stream was cut. The screen went black. A message appeared. Stream removed due to violation of broadcast standards. But it was too late. Within minutes, mirror uploads appeared. Within hours, the hashtags exploded. Within a day, Nova became more than a design. It became a symbol. The storm Cinerex had tried to unleash came crashing back at them. Hackers exposed internal documents showing how the company had blocked innovation for years to maintain profit margins. Whistleblowers came forward, revealing unethical patents, forced suppressions, bribes to lawmakers, and the quiet burying of better, cheaper designs. Governments were forced to respond. Lawsuits were filed. Stock prices plummeted. Protests formed outside the company's headquarters in multiple cities. People held signs that read, "Let them walk." But the final moment came not through courts or commentary. It came from Maya. A week later, she was invited to speak at the United Nations Humanitarian Forum. Unlike before, there was no security panic, no whispers of exploitation. People stood, in respect before she even began. She walked to the podium alone, then paused and sat, not out of weakness, but intention. "Everyone expects me to stand to make a point," she said. "But standing isn't the point. Choice is." She tapped her Nova leg gently. "These don't make me powerful. What makes me powerful is that someone saw me before the world saw me. And what we built together gave me choices I never had. So, if you're watching this and you feel small, unseen, broken, I want you to know that you are already enough. And when someone tells you otherwise, remember this moment." She stood up then, and walked away. The room didn't clap. They wept. Keanu watched from the side of the stage, a hand resting on his heart. He hadn't built the legs to change the world. He'd built them for one child. And because of that, the world had changed anyway. In the months that followed, Station Ember evolved into a global hub for open-source medical innovation. No longer underground, it operated under a worldwide license of cooperative humanitarian effort. Universities taught the Nova blueprint as part of engineering ethics. Maya became the youngest advisor ever appointed to the Global Disabilities Council. She didn't want fame, she just wanted more kids to walk. One night, under the same stars that once watched them flee, she sat beside Keanu near the edge of the desert and whispered, "Do you think it's over now?" He looked at her, eyes soft, but still vigilant. "No, movements don't end. They ripple." She smiled, and the desert didn't hold its breath anymore. It exhaled, because the world was no longer watching in silence. It was standing,